Your Creative Force by Avianne is currently available on Global Voice Radio.
Talent is a flame. Genius is a fire. Broadcasting from the San Francisco Bay Area, the all-new all-hit show on creativity. Hosted by international award-winning artist and entrepreneur, Avianne. You're listening to Your Creative Force. And now here's your host, Avianne.
Hi, this is Avianne coming to you once again from the lovely San Francisco Bay Area in California, the USA. And I am super excited about today because I have someone I am going to interview for you today. It is so hard to track these guys down. I am so fortunate because I live here in Silicon Valley area, right? And I have access to all these amazing professionals and people that I know. I know a lot of amazing people. But the problem is tracking them down to actually interview them is quite an ordeal because these are folks who are super busy, super on the forefront of high tech and all the wonderful hustle and bustle that goes on here in Silicon Valley. So I am very thrilled today that I have tracked down someone I've been meaning to interview for a long time, and his name is Adrian Ko. So this is episode 26 of Your Creative Force with Avianne, and our show theme for today is the power of great branding, an interview with Adrian Ko. Adrian is quite a unique person in Silicon Valley, and he's worked for many different companies in the area of branding, but he's done so much more. So in this episode, I am going to interview a sought-after Silicon Valley branding expert about how branding a business accurately and in a sophisticated way can really help a business to set itself up for long-term success. And how does branding play into that? By positioning the business in the correct market and having their message and values resonate with their ideal client. Being coherent in branding is something that a lot of businesses struggle with. And so we're going to tackle this topic today. It is also something that is very underestimated by businesses. A lot of businesses think if they just go online and zap together a logo, that means they're branded. And it's a little more involved in that. So we are going to speak about that today. Okay. So Adrian Ko has been a marketing leader for technology startup companies in the tech hub of the Silicon Valley area in San Jose and San Francisco, California for 15 years. He has been head of marketing as well as held creative director roles. What has made his skill set unique is that he combines strategy and creativity to enhance anything from product marketing to brand identity and visual communications. That has helped companies get funded and has enabled them to reach their sales and financial objectives faster. This in turn has made CEOs regard him as their secret weapon. He's actually been called this by CEOs. Many of these startups have won industry awards and acclaim, and 3 of them were eventually acquired and became part of giants such as McAfee, Visa, and VMware. Okay. So that's quite a mouthful. So I'm bringing you a true expert here. Okay. I don't just whip up people out of nowhere. The people I'm bringing on my show, the articles that I've discussed with you guys so far, it is of someone, it is from people that really know what they're doing. Okay. Because you really need to ask the experts if you want to know what's going on, okay? And in part 1, I'm going to just speak to you guys quickly about why the secret of great branding is so often overlooked, okay? I go online and I see a lot of people market themselves and I look at their brand and I'm very confused. Nothing is coherent. The way they describe their business online, the way they actually use different fonts on their websites, the different ways that they send out messages about their brand and the way they communicate their company values. A lot of times it's all over the place and you can't really tell what is their coherent brand strategy and message. And I think many people do not understand the secret of great branding and overlook it because they do not really understand what branding is to begin with. Okay. They think of it in terms of a cool looking logo or the fancy name of a company, but branding is so much more than just that. In fact, a lot of businesses completely miss the mark in their branding because they think that the more fancy or colorful or funny or such their logo is, or the more elaborate their mission statement is, the more attention their business will get. Nothing can be further from the truth, as I have discovered by networking with people like Adrian Ko here in Silicon Valley. Okay, now before I go on, I just want you to realize something about me and my branding as well. Adrian is the brain behind my brand, so I am very grateful for having someone like Adrian on my team of experts that I can ask for advice on this topic. But my brand is still very new and very young in many ways, and we are still working on refining it. So you have to understand that a brand is something you totally have to redefine constantly. It's not something that you just do once and then it's done, right? If you look at all the big brand names, they sophisticatedly over time build their brand strategy into something more, something sharper, ever more, right? Because it's not just something, and that's the other mistake people make, right? I would often look at the websites or the brands of artists online, and I would think to myself, you really look like you're someone who is painting posters from the 70s. And then I realized the reason it looks like that is because they got their brand in the 70s or 80s and they just stuck to that brand and they never refined it and they never kept it updated, right? We also have to keep a brand updated. So some of the reasons that great branding is often overlooked, okay? I'm going to point out 7 things that I have learned about branding and why I think branding gets overlooked as a very important aspect of business before we go deeper into this topic with Adrian in part 2 of our show, okay? So I wrote down 7 things for you guys that I think plays a big important role in branding and also explains why branding is often overlooked, okay? Before I mention these 7 things, there's something you need to understand, okay? Most people are not really visually literate, okay? Visual literacy, just like knowing how to read and write, is a specific type of literacy. And branding and visual literacy has nothing to do with your personal taste. If you do your brand because you like the picture or you like the font or it sounds cool to you, you're missing the mark. You don't get it, okay? Because it's not about that. You are probably, unless you are a very sophisticated artist or interior decorator or graphic designer, you probably have really low visual literacy. And you have to understand that, because just because you like a color or because you like what a logo looks like does not mean that it's going to work for your brand. Okay. So that's something you need to understand. And Adrian schooled me in this tremendously, because I didn't realize that when it comes to brand identity, I actually didn't really know what that involved before I really took on my own branding as a project. Okay. So realize that, okay, the 7 things that I've learned about branding and why I think great branding is often overlooked, the secret of what great branding can do for you. Number 1, if you think of successful higher end brands, they all have some things in common. They are sophisticated, but they are very simple. Okay. Simplicity. Okay. People want to put too much information into a brand identity and then they dilute their brand, and they don't understand that. Okay. The sophisticated high-end brands, if you think of Tiffany or you think of Calvin Klein or you think of Guess or you think of the Lucky brand, right? They do not use many words, many pictures or many colors and crazy looking fonts to describe themselves or their products in advertising or even on their products, okay? Think of brands like Gucci or Apple. You probably cannot even really remember their slogan, but you are very aware of their products and their brand, okay? Think of Nike. Just do it. What a simple phrase, right? With a logo that is basically, if you think about it, just a white mark on a colorful background. And the colorful background is one color. Do you see what I'm saying to you? I look at a lot of creative people, right? Because I'm surrounded by a lot of creative people, and their logos are so cheap looking because they try and create a painting. They're not branding themselves. They try and make their logo a painting, and it's convoluted and it looks messy and it doesn't communicate sophistication. It just looks like every other thing that you can find out there, right? There's no way of setting yourself apart. So one of the things I want to point out here for you is, when you look at successful branding, look at companies who are actually successful in their branding, okay? Don't look at your friend who has a similar business to you and are still trying to make it. Look at the brands and the people, and study the brands and the people who really have success with their branding. That's what I do, okay? All the big brands, all the successful brands, the brands that end up making it are very sophisticated, but they're simple. They're not cluttered. They're not full of visual information, full of colors, full of crazy fonts. They are readable. You can instantly recognize them. Okay. Apple is probably one of the most successful brands out there. And I mean, think about it. It's just a little bitten apple, right? In silver. And it's on a white background for the most part. Sometimes it's on different backgrounds, but it's plain. They don't even really use a slogan, right? It's just this little apple symbol. It's just a little symbol, and it's so effective. So think about the sophistication of the simplicity and how well thought out it actually is. And think about where they started. If you remember the first Apple computers, they were very colorful, right? The little Apple symbol was in rainbow colors, if I remember correctly. So over the years, Apple they've simplified their brand. Instead of making it more elaborate and more juiced up, they've actually made it more sophisticated by simplifying it. So think about these things when you are thinking about your own brand, okay? Don't compare your brand to the person next door. Compare your brand and see how your brand and the sophistication of your brand measures up to people who are actually more sophisticated in their branding than you are. Okay. So number one, if you think of successful higher-end brands, they all have some things in common. They are sophisticated but very simple, right? They do not use many words, many pictures or many colors, and crazy-looking fonts to describe themselves or their products in advertising or even on their products. Number two, then, listen up. High-end brands have the same golden thread in terms of a very straightforward brand message running throughout every aspect of their company. The entire brand is a promise of quality and excellence. Every word, every picture, every gift bag, every logo, and every price tag represent the values and success that their brand wishes to convey. The brand message is usually a simplified version of their mission statement, which in turn reflects the values and sophistication of the brand. Okay? It's plain, simple, easy to recognize, okay? If you think of getting an iPhone and comes in this really beautiful box, right? Everything is sophisticated about the phone, even the packaging. Nothing looks cheap. Nothing looks like it's been skimped on. The brand is consistent in delivering its brand promise of excellence. Think about these things when you're branding your business. Number three, you need a professional to really help you brand your business successfully. This is something a lot of people don't understand, okay? I have touched upon this. Remember that most people are not visually literate. Branding can actually make or break your business, and it is a very underestimated aspect of building a business well from the ground up. Visual communication in terms of branding is actually a science as much as it is an art form, something that very few web designers designers, graphic artists, or business owners really grasp, okay? Even CEOs of large corporations often do not understand how to brand their companies well because they do not have the visual literacy and a deeper, sophisticated understanding of the science behind branding, skills that are required for sophisticated brand messaging. You cannot wing a brand, okay? You cannot base your brand upon what you like and what you don't like or what your family thinks you should be doing. You need to get someone in there developing that brand for you or with you who really is visually literate, who really has some sort of experience with branding and who knows how to keep things very high level, very sophisticated, and who are willing to edit out a lot of the nonsense you're going to want to put into your brand. And why am I laughing and why am I telling you this? Because I am guilty. Okay. As business owners, we want to put so much into a brand that we sometimes overwhelm our customers. They don't know what we're trying to tell them, right? You see this a lot in business signage. You see this a lot in business advertising, where it's just too much going on. Once again, think about how absolutely simple and sophisticated the well-recognized brands are, okay? They don't overdo it. Okay. Number 4, branding is very specific and a very customized, industry-specific part of your business. You cannot really copycat someone else's brand message, logo, or business methods in your branding because branding depends on a variety of factors, like who your target audience is, for instance, right? You will not brand a Harley-Davidson motorcycle dealership the same way you will brand a skateboard store because the two brands would likely differ enormously in terms of the demographics of their respective markets. Okay. I cannot tell you here where I am how often I come across companies, big and small, businesses, big and small, that try to duplicate the branding strategy of Apple. It's very common here. They do it all the time and it never works. And you know why it never works? Because Apple pays millions of dollars to artists and strategists and designers and brand experts and marketing gurus to develop their brand, to target their message, to make it that great, to make it that sophisticated. They pinpoint everything about their branding. Everything is streamlined. Everything is a unified whole. And it's specifically geared towards their product and their market. It has nothing to do with anything else. That's why I can tell you from having witnessed this, people who try and just copy that doesn't work. You cannot look at someone else's brand and just copy it. Okay. You can reverse engineer some of their brand messages to a degree and maybe incorporate some of their successful ideas into what you do. But you can highly, at the most, you can actually just use it for inspiration. You can never copycat someone else's brand. And that's a mistake a lot of people make. They think if they just piggyback onto someone else's already thought out brand message, that they're going to make it. And I've never seen it work. Maybe it's worked for people, but I can tell you I have never seen that work. Okay. Because branding is very specified. Okay. Number 5, if your brand is not created in a sophisticated way, it will make your business look cheap. And if you establish yourself as a cheapskate business in your field, you will have a very hard time changing that brand perception at a later stage. Okay. Once again, crafters and artists often make this mistake. They think that because they are creative, they can create their own brand, but they do not realize that a lot of the ways they may create their art or crafts products may not translate very well into a direct, minimalist, sophisticated brand, right? For instance, let's say Calvin Klein had hand-drawn images of clothing designs in pastel colors on his clothing labels, right? You could imagine that would certainly not communicate the same sophistication as the Calvin Klein name in gold or silver stitched into the clothing. Can you see the difference? So just because you are creative and you may have a good eye for a certain type of art or a certain type of visual, or you may have very strong preferences of what you like and don't like, does not mean that you are visually literate in terms of branding, and you need to understand that. And branding is not only visual, it's also got to do with messaging and writing, with strategy and creativity, okay? It's a science and an art. Most people either understand the science or either, for the most part, understand the art. Very few people know how to put the science and the art of branding together. That's why you can't do it on your own, okay? So, number 6, also something people do not understand. Your brand association matters. Your brand needs to associate itself with other brands that are on par with where you want to take your brand. Look at the products that Starbucks sell, for instance. A lot of these products, from cookies to salads to bottled water, they're not manufactured or packaged by Starbucks themselves, yet they communicate a very superior yet relatable experience for the consumer the exact same way the Starbucks brand does, okay? Your brand associates need to either be your equals or your superiors in terms of brand messaging in their own right, okay? I am never going to sell in my art gallery the art of another artist that I do not feel measure up to my own art or is of even higher quality than my own art, okay? If in my view, this person's work does not measure up, I will not sell it in my gallery. Why? Because I'm being judgmental and mean? No. But because my brand is a brand that I want to be associated with sophistication and excellence. And I am not going to put work in my art gallery that break down my brand messaging. Okay? That is just how it works for me. So remember that. Your brand association matters. Okay? Then, number 7. Your brand, though in need of being sophisticated and stable, is a beast with a life of its own. It will take many years of grooming your brand to get it to perfection, and you may still need to update it according to the times. Think of Coca-Cola, right? The Coca-Cola brand is one of the most successful brands on the planet throughout history. It's been around for a very long time. But over the years, the brand of Coca-Cola has undergone many developments and upgrades to get it to remain current and attractive. If your brand looks dated or childish, it can appear as if your brand is stuck in the previous decade and will translate into your product or service being perceived as being childish or dated. Okay? So you have to remember it. I'm quickly going to mention these 7 things again. Okay? So number 1, if you think of successful higher-end brands, they all have certain things in common. They do not use many words, many pictures, or many colors, and crazy-looking fonts or long descriptions to describe their products in advertising or even on their products themselves, right? Number 2, high-end brands have the same golden thread in terms of a very straightforward brand message running throughout every aspect of their company. Okay? Number 3, you need a professional to really help you brand your business successfully. Okay? Visual communication in terms of branding is actually a science as much as it is an art form. Number 4, branding is very specific and a very customized industry-specific part of your business. That is why you cannot really copycat someone else's branding. Okay. Number 5, your brand, if not created in a sophisticated way, will make your business look cheap. And if you establish yourself as a cheapskate type business in your field, you will have a very hard time changing that brand perception at a later stage. Number 6, brand association matters. Your brand needs to associate itself with other brands that are on par with where you want to take your brand. Number 7, your brand, though in need of being sophisticated and stable, is a beast with a life of its own. It will take many years of grooming your brand to get it to perfection, and you may still need to update it according to the times, especially if your brand is going to exist for the long haul, right? And with that, we're going to end part 1 of our show, and in part 2 of our show, I will introduce Adrian Ko to delve a bit deeper into branding with us. We'll be back shortly.
Catch the fire of creativity, visit artbyavianne.com. Avianne. And now we return to our show with Avianne.
And we are back with part 2 of our show today, episode 26 of Your Creative Force. And our theme for today is the power of great branding. And I am here with Adrian Ko. We are doing our interview. Adrian has been a marketing leader for technology startup companies in the tech hub of the Silicon Valley area in San Jose and San Francisco, California, for 15 years. He has been head of marketing as well as held creative director roles. What has made his skill set unique is that he combines strategy and creativity to enhance anything from product marketing to brand identity and visual communications. That has helped companies get funded and has enabled them to reach their sales and financial objectives faster. This, in turn, has made CEOs regard him as their secret weapon. Many of these startups have won industry awards and acclaim, and 3 of them were eventually acquired and became part of giants such as McAfee, Visa, and VMware. So, Adrian, let's get started.
Yeah,
Hi, Adrian. How are you doing today?
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, so I'm going to jump right in for the sake of time, I'm going to ask you some questions here. Okay, so our first question, I'm sure everyone is very interested in this. Mm-hmm. Please tell us a bit more about your fascinating background, specifically pertaining to branding, tech startups, and small businesses.
Sure thing. Well, I've been very grateful to have been able to join various startup firms in Silicon Valley and sometimes right at the ground floor level. And these are usually very interesting circumstances because these companies just got their funding and maybe they haven't found or even moved into an office space yet. And up until that point, they had been meeting in homes or cafes and surviving basically on shoe leather. But now that they have gotten their initial round of funding, they have to spend it very wisely. Most of it goes into engineering to develop the product, so sales and marketing gets whatever little that's left. And typically, there's not enough budget to display, freeway billboards, do radio and TV commercials and the like, or print ad advertising in newspapers and magazines. So basically, they're on a shoestring budget. They have to make do with what they have. So ultimately, it falls on me to create a brand that would win confidence, project authority and leadership in tone that we have domain expertise, and basically convey that we're not a fly-by-night operation, but we're here to stay. And that's no easy matter because we had to win over 1,000 clients. And I'm pretty privileged to say that that's exactly what we achieved.
Great. That sounds like a great deal of responsibility. So having so little budget, how did you actually go about taking on your challenges in branding?
Mm-hmm. Well, here's the funny thing, and it's a popular saying that goes around in the business world. You want something done? Here are 3 criteria. Good, fast, cheap. Pick 2. But this is where, if you're doing a startup, you just have to have startup DNA and try to do all 3. If you have little budget, you have to get creative and innovative. Now, if you can't afford stock photography, you may have to borrow a friend's digital camera or draw all the icons and graphics yourself. If you can't afford to hire an agency, then study the portfolios of the best agencies that you can find and just get a sense of what is considered leading edge for the different industries that they design for. So, basically, when I've built brands in those situations, I've created a variety of graphic libraries of supporting art and basically did all that from scratch. I recall that at one startup, my marketing budget was literally the $50 in the CEO's wallet because we couldn't afford a subscription to the stock photography site. But the upside of that was that everything that represented that company was fully custom.
Wow. What was your key objective, or what you would call your North Star, when developing brand identity for startups? Please elaborate.
Well, when you're when you're presenting your company from a branding perspective, especially if your client are Fortune 1000, these are very high stakes. So you can't look like a startup in somebody's basement or garage, or come across like your logo was designed by a young family member who just started at a graphic design school, or that you got your logo from a $5, website that happened to be selling a lot of logos on the cheap. You have to look like the kind of company that the target end customer would trust and do business with. And then behind the scenes, you had to be that very company. Let me explain. See, everything that represents you has to radiate that, that trust, the values that you represent. It's not just the logo. It goes to the website, not just the way it's designed, but the written copy as well. It also spans your corporate and product videos, if any, the print literature like the product data sheets and brochures, any thought leadership materials such as white papers, and if you have sales teams, any PowerPoint pitch decks. And then everything you have in your visuals, your messaging, and your positioning has to communicate how you're going to meet your customers' needs, how you solve their pain points, and how their lives will be different using your product, service, or solution, and then finally distinguish how you're unique and competitors aren't like you. And so all these things work as a whole to define your brand. So being at early stage startups gave me the opportunity to address all these customer touch points and also ensure that everything we were stating externally was what we were actually delivering internally behind the scenes, so that there was excellence end to end.
It sounds like a good way to create continuity in a brand. Mm-hmm. But Adrian, how would you define the concept of branding exactly for our listeners? What is branding really about?
Oh, that's a really good question. I would say this. It's your brand is your identity, your value, and your promise, which is also known as a brand promise. And that's your commitment to deliver and the excellence that you deliver to please your customers. And I'd also say this. Anything that potentially represents you, whether it's a web page or a brochure or even something as small as a business card, it should communicate that identity, that value, commitment, and that excellence. And then I'd finally say that it's also about how you are different, how you are unique, what's special about you. And I think that all this has to be implied by and represented by your brand.
Wow, that sounds like a lot.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
What do you think is the biggest blind spot or blind spots that a small business or a new business owner or starting company may have in creating a successful, coherent brand message and image?
Wow. Okay, that's tricky because most people, when they think brand, they think logo. And, it is, but it's a lot more than a logo. I would say that people's biggest blind spot is that they rush to define the logo and the corporate look before they've even defined their core values. And that kind of ties back into that excellence thing that I just mentioned.
Yeah, I see that a lot.
Yeah. So the question they should first ask themselves is, what kind of relationship should we have with our customers? Now, for example, what would customers think and feel about us? Because that emotional connection is really important. And what would they say about us to family, friends, on social media, review sites? Because word of mouth is also important, because from that experience, they can speak with conviction. Now, some companies, after a sale, they never see their customers again, which is, unfortunate. Sometimes it happens. Yet some businesses become a brand their customers trust in the long term. And those customers keep on coming back. And so the business is not a one-off. There's now an ongoing relationship that's being established. And so the important thing is to develop a brand identity that is relatable and a brand message that resonates with your customers and needs. And that engenders that kind of ongoing relationship that's mutually beneficial for you and your customers.
Definitely.
Yeah. And then once you figure that out and define the core values you need to produce the excellence that will power those relationships, then you're ready to determine what kind of visual branding you should have.
Wow, that is a really good answer. Thank you. So how do you think a small business who may not have the marketing or strategic budget of a larger company can position themselves more effectively in terms of branding with regard to their competition?
Well, that's a really good question. We're living in a time where there are a lot of attractive website templates that are pretty affordable. And there are very talented freelance graphic artists that can easily upgrade the look of any website. But as much as small businesses have flocked to these website templates, there's something just kind of cookie cutter about the whole thing, about the whole experience. It's like an attractive layout just for the sake of a layout. And as you're looking at it, you notice one thing, the substance, the message isn't clear. It's as if the web designers or agencies or the businesses themselves try to put wording up for the sake of occupying the placeholder spaces in the templates.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
It looks generic. It starts looking very generic.
Exactly.
Yes.
And customers can tell. See, they can see that something is slick and is using stock photography, but there's something flat about the overall experience. So ultimately, what's missing is the story, the soul. And I would say that's the quote unquote, the why of why are we here? And again, I shared earlier about the relationship. What kind of relationship do you want with your customers? And what is it that will cause them to choose you over your competition?
Exactly.
And that can be a variety of factors. It could be anything from you being more economical or affordable to you meeting a very emotional need in their lives, that they were enriched by what you provided. Their lives are better. And even in some small way because of the efforts that you made to be there for them. Now that is the why, and that is the soul of the story. And basically that needs to be the very feel and the foundation of your marketing.
Yes, because that will, am I understanding this correctly? That will become your differentiator that sets you apart from your competition, right?
Yeah.
It's not just looking like everyone else in your industry, doing exactly the same, looking like you're copying everyone else in your industry, right?
Yeah, very well said. Because Steve Jobs was always about not being a quote unquote a Me Too type of product or a Me Too kind of company. And so when you are able to differentiate the why of your story, that is basically then your story.
Great. That makes so much sense. What can a small business do, in your opinion, to keep their branding consistent and relevant within this ever-evolving technology era? Like how brands become dated or they don't keep up with technology and then they are clunky and they look outdated. So how can we keep our branding consistent and relevant within this ever-evolving technology era?
Yeah, I'd say that at a very basic level, there should be one logo representing your organization. Now, there might be some slight variants of the logo, but usually that's like, for example, if you're going to display it against a white background or a dark background, because you might need to do a little bit of color calibration. Is it going to be against, say a pane of glass, like a vinyl cutout? Is there a full color version as opposed to a single color version? But whatever logo or symbol you settle on, don't let anybody stretch it horizontally or vertically and alter its proportions.
Yeah, I've seen that. It looks really bad.
Yeah, it starts looking kludgy. See, the logo should never be altered in that way because just because somebody can't fit content on a page without reshaping that logo. I mean, that's considered a total crime in the graphic arts world.
I can see that.
Right. And they go, okay, amateur, right?
Yes.
Red alert, right? So So let's say you do have a logo that you really like, and you've tested it with some customers, and the customers are really on board with it. I would avoid over branding, and let me explain.
Yeah.
See, some companies feel that they need to create a logo and trademark for every single product, and that's probably overkill for a small business looking to be recognized. Because as important as a brand is, there's also the recognition of your brand.
Okay.
And if you're trying to use more than one logo, chances are your customers are going to find that inconsistency either confusing or they won't recognize you and they think you have some kind of identity crisis.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do a lot of online marketing, and I'm going to change the subject just very, very slightly, just give you a different angle. So if you're going to do a lot of online marketing, whether it's ads or landing pages or social media sites like Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and the like, you may want to consider that your logo needs to fit within a circular or square form factor, because every time you see some of these pages, notice the thumbnail that represents the person or the organization. It's usually a square form factor. So you have to fit optimally within that. So if your logo is like a really wide rectangle, then when it's resized down to fit within that square thumbnail, it may not be legible. And I think that becomes a real challenge for people to recognize you as a brand. Also, if your website is responsive, and let me clarify what that means, okay? In the world of websites, responsiveness means that your web page will adapt to desktops and tablets and even the small screens of mobile devices. Your logo has to survive even that form factor of a mobile device. So if you want to get some examples, just visit sites like Apple's HP, Hewlett-Packard, and Dell, and use a mobile phone and compare that with a desktop and just see how their logos appear even on a tiny screen. They're legible. They're very clear.
Yes, and that's why when we develop our brand, we should definitely hire people who know what they're doing to help us, right? We can't just wing this.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully these are people who aren't just aspiring graphic artists, as good and as talented that they might be. I don't want to put them down. You got to start somewhere, right? But you do want people who have had experience crafting corporate identities.
Yes.
And I would say the simpler, the better. The more memorable, the better. I mean, you can have a beautifully detailed logo, but then if it's shrunk down, it might not be legible. And I think that's where some people make some mistakes. You need to consider the multiple situations in which your logo design has to hold up.
Yeah, I agree with that, because it bothers me a lot when people's logos are extremely cluttered and busy and you can't even really tell what it is. It's got a flower and a symbol of an eye and a bird, and it's got so much going on that it looks like an illustration, not really like a logo to me. Yeah,
the simpler is better. And it's about being recognizable, and that's the way you'll have to, plan your design, is how do I make sure that my logo stands out, is memorable, is recognizable, represents me, represents my energy, my core values, what I bring to the table, and the kind of relationship that I want to have with my customers.
Yes, you remind me of something I said in part one of my show today earlier, was about how if you really want to look at the sophisticated high-end brands who are very successful. If you look at Honda, if you look at Gucci, Apple, all of these brands, they're very simple. They're sophisticated, but they're striking. With one glance, you can tell exactly what you're seeing and you can tell exactly what you're looking at. And they're very unique. Right. And why I also said earlier in the show today that you can't really copy someone else's brand, because branding is so different for each specific business. There's so many reasons, and that's why you have to have someone who's visually literate to help you, someone who's experienced and knows about branding.
Yeah, and one good way of identifying that is when you take a look at their the agency's website, really study their portfolio. because if
Good.
they have
Good
done,
advice.
if they have done, if they've had a lot of clients, they will have clients of different industries, so you can see how they've addressed those particular problems. Like, I'll give you a great example. You mentioned some of these big brand names. They've spent years developing towards that. Once in a while, they might modify their logo slightly, but it ends up working out for them. Like, for example, Hewlett-Packard simplified their logo to now it's just, HP. There may be some companies that when they start out really, really small, they aspire to be one day big, and they might change along the way, but it's not a bad idea to think with greatness from the beginnings. Now, sometimes a corporate identity, might be one of that of a mom and pop shop, your friendly neighborhood go-to kind of place. And if that's what you want to be true to that. Don't try to look like a high-tech startup. Don't try to look like an automotive or a healthcare, type of brand, especially if you're not even in that space. So find what works for you, what represents you and your values and the customer relationships that you have the best.
Yes. Okay. And in conclusion of part 2 of our show, I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we'll be back with part 3, where we will continue our discussion. Last question for part 2 of our show today. If you owned a small business, where would you place the bulk of your marketing budget and why?
Wow. That's an interesting question. I would say that, as a blanket statement, I'd invest in what's called online marketing.
Wow.
And that's going to apply differently to different businesses and different needs. Now,
I can see that.
For example, if you're going to be a brick and mortar location, like say a cafe or a store, versus doing it purely through your own website, like online sales, or even doing sales through a site like Etsy. And I'll explain why. But in either case, you may do well consulting with a good qualified online marketing agency, and not just an agency that just does art or design. Because an online marketing agency would ideally really know how to make sure you show up in search engine results, because now there's a whole level of sophistication and technology that's there. And they also understand how to get good engagement on social media. If you're a brick and mortar location, sites like Apple and Google have made it possible for people to use their mobile phones, pick it up, and do a voice-assisted search.
Yes.
So when you can say to Siri or Google, you press the button, you go cafe near me or Thai food near me.
Yes.
Then when you see the search results, you're one of the push pins on the map that are relevant to the search results. And one of the major mechanisms that allow you to be on the map like that is Google My Business. That's what it's called.
I use that.
Yeah, and it allows you to tell and inform the Google engine everything it needs for people to find and engage with your business. So when you feed it information such as your address, phone number, websites, operating hours, photographs, directions, and that kind of thing, people can actually click on that information. And if you've ever done a Google search, which I think most people have, Google is about 90% to 92% of global share in search. When you see a search engine page with Google, but it also applies to DuckDuckGo, Bing, and the others, you'll typically see on the right-hand side what they call a knowledge panel, and your business would ideally appear there. That same information with Google on the knowledge panel also appears in Google Maps. Things like the website buttons, they're click-throughable. And then people can come to your website. Directions, they can click on that, or they could even click to call you and engage you that way. And so you need that mechanism like a Google My Business to have that information work for you. Yes. So that's important. And especially if you have more than one physical brick and mortar location. Make sure all your locations are on the map. So when people say cafe near me or whatever business it is that you're doing, make sure that that you show up in search. The other area is social media, and social media is not just for awareness. You can also drive a lot of click-through engagement with your customers. And what I mean by that in terms of engagement is that they may see a social media post or some kind of advertisement, but ultimately you want them to click through. You want them to engage with that ad or that post and basically come to you, because that's another step they take in converting into becoming your customers. You can use them to build your followers, your audience, and then basically leverage the power of word of mouth and online recommendations. You can target audiences by demographics and monitor ad performance. Then you can fine tune and improve on your campaign and increase the performance with time. And you can do all these things by yourself, but if you leverage a qualified and experienced agency, they can help you focus on what you do best, and then they could do the heavy lifting for online marketing.
Oh, certainly. And thank you. With that, we're going to conclude part 2 of our show. Wow, that was really helpful. Thank you, Adrian. And we'll be back with Adrian for part 3 of our show shortly.
Talent is a flame. Genius is a fire. And now we return to our show with your host, Avianne.
And we're back with part 3 of our show today, episode 26 of Your Creative Force, and our theme is the power of great branding. And we are concluding our interview with Adrian Ko today. So, Adrian, in conclusion of our show here today, do you have any other advice or insightful takeaways that you may have for us on the topic of branding?
Well, earlier on, I mentioned the importance of the soul of your story of your business. So as a business leader, you have to first define for yourself why your business matters.
Yes.
And some of the questions that you may want to kind of do a pre-flight check on is, what is the difference that you want to make in people's lives?
Yes,
what is the need? What is the need that you're trying to meet, and what is the problem you're trying to solve? Some great examples I've seen are videos on sites like Indiegogo and Kickstarter.
Yes,
and it's not so much that the video production quality that really wins people over, although that is a big factor, but it's the story that unfolds in those videos. And I'm not trying to suggest to all your listeners that they have to now go out and do a video, but it certainly wouldn't hurt. But the point I'm trying to make is that the art of story is a lot like Joseph Campbell, who wrote about the hero's journey. And it's a very simple storytelling structure that we're all innately familiar with. See, everyone's journey is going to be different, but usually somebody watching your video or reading about the About Us page of your website, they may resonate with you if you handle your story right. And it might be something along the lines that, you're a person just like your customers. You found a problem or you had a need and you looked everywhere, but you couldn't find an answer for that need. You couldn't find anything that would meet it. So you basically took up a journey to try to solve that. And that journey wasn't simple. You hunted high and low, searched far and wide, and ultimately you had to create it and you had to innovate it. And then along the way, there were setbacks. People said it couldn't be done, or or they tell you that this is the norm and you're just going to have to accept it. But, you didn't. You persisted and you fought and you finally broke through. And look what you delivered. Yeah. And that all aligns with your core values. And then people who have tried to say that, and then you have people who then come in and say, wow, we've tried it. It's wonderful. Their lives are different because of it. And they thank you for having persisted through that and brought that into their lives.
Very cool.
So see, all of that ties into your brand messaging, which basically, you can summarize by saying that it covers who are you? why should your customers care? What is the problem or the pain that you're solving? Why your solution? Why your team? And if you can think of how you meet their needs, whether it's basic, survival, psychological, emotional, or self-actualization, kind of like with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the pyramid diagram, that's pretty famous.
Yes, I know about that.
And then if you cover why you're a must-have and that you want to be, what you want the ongoing relationship with your customers to look like. You do all that, then congratulations, you're ready to take on the world with your branding.
Right. Adrian, can you repeat what you just said in terms of who are you and so forth, these questions that we should ask ourselves to make sure that our brand messaging comes across?
Yeah. I mean, basically, you want to be able to speak from conviction. Now, this is not exactly a format, but you need to have answered this for yourself.
Okay.
You need to have you need to have done this as a pre-flight check.
Okay.
So if ever it came out, somebody popped the question, you'd be able to address that. But fundamentally, this will, once you've defined this kind of in the background, then in the foreground, any messaging that you have in your website, your brochures, any kind of slogan that you define for your company will also stand on all the stuff that you've done in the background, if that makes sense.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, we should first be very clear about the who's, the whys, and the whats.
The who, what, where, when, why, how. Yeah.
Of what we are doing, so that when we communicate it as part of our branding message, it comes across clearly and decisively.
Exactly.
Okay.
So just to kind of recap, I would say you should define and tie into your brand message, who are you? Why should customers even care about you? What is the problem and the pain that you solve in their lives?
Yes.
Why should they consider your solution, not other people? And what makes your team different? Why your people and not somebody else, that of the competition? How are you, or your business going to meet their needs? And things to think about with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There are different levels of needs. Some of them are basic survival needs. You absolutely have to have that, otherwise you die,
Yes.
Then there are psychological, like I feel safe, I feel comforted. And then emotional kind of dovetails into that. But then some of them are emotional, like how are you going to move the needle for them there?
Oh, definitely.
And then self-actualization. One really, really great example, I think, was Steve Jobs when he realized where computers needed to be, because everybody considered them engineering solutions. And he goes, no, computers need to sit at the intersection of technology and the humanities, the liberal arts. And so it wasn't about just producing a computer. It was about producing a solution that enabled people in turn to become artists, to become musicians, to become painters, like digital painters.
To live their dreams. To
empower them. And so he was more interested about advancing the human condition and changing people's lives. And the means by which he would do that was to create an intersection of technology and the liberal arts in the form of an Apple computer.
Very awesome.
So that would be self-actualization. And then ultimately your brand should somehow intone, then think about it. And again, it's not just the logo. It's not just the visual design. And it's going to be part of your messaging, your positioning, and what you write about on your website and about yourself is that why you're a must-have and what kind of relationship that you want to have in your customers' lives, because that can be a very profound relationship. And that's it. And you'd be ready to take on the world.
Fantastic. Adrian, thank you so much for being with us today. I am sure all our listeners have learned so much from you today. And not all of us get a chance to sit down with people like you every day. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, and we hope to have you again someday. Maybe. We don't know. I know you're a very busy man. And all the best of luck with all your business ventures in future. We wish you the best.
Thank you.
Thank you so so much. And yes, folks, that was Adrian Ko. Wasn't that amazing? We bring you the good stuff on your creative force for sure. And we're going to conclude our show, as always, with our quote of the day. And our quote of the day is by the famous marketing expert Gary Vaynerchuk from New York City. And he said, you have to understand your own personal DNA. Don't do things because I do them or Steve Jobs or Mark Cuban tried it. You need to know your personal brand and stay true to it. And on that high note, we're going to love and leave you until next time on Your Creative Force.
Talent is a flame. Genius, a fire. Visit us at artbyavian.com. Tune in next time as we explore your creative force. Thank you for listening.